welcome to the next in the series of the Deep Crawl webinars. I have the privilege again of hosting and, really enjoying doing this for quite a while now, in all honesty, and we have another great subject for you today. So obviously, my name is John Myers. For anyone that hasn't been here before, I'm sure we have some returning attendees and maybe some new people. I'm your host for the day, and we're going to get through the next 45 minutes together. As always, we have a great subject for you guys. And also two great presenters to take us through this subject. We're going to today be talking about why SEOs should care about accessibility. And it's probably a question that a lot of us constantly ask as SEOs, kind of thing is, well, what does it matter about the accessibility piece? I just want to do great rankings, great, positions, all that sort of side of things, produce great content, great, create traffic into the website and ultimately convert. Accessibility is a big part of the thing that we need to do, and it's becoming more and more of a thing that we need to think about ongoing. And as I say, with us today, we have two fantastic presenters. We have Deep Crawl's very own tech SEO analyst, who is Ruth Everett, and Jessica James, who is the account director at Erudite. So, welcome, guys. Thanks for being here.
Thanks for having us.
Thank you.
Don't be silly. It's great to have you. Otherwise, I'd have to present all the content and crack on for the next 45 minutes. So it's wonderful to have you here to do this for me. For any of you guys that have attended before, you'll hear me say this every time, but anybody that's new, we are following the usual format of our webinars. It's around about 25 to 30 minutes of presentation. And then obviously we'll follow that up with Q&A, because I'm sure on this subject there will be some absolute burning questions. There'll be things that you guys want to understand a little bit more. Maybe we can nip back and dig into some things that the guys can present over the next sort of 30 minutes. As always, this session will be recorded. We do a full write-up, as you can imagine, plus the recording on the Deep Crawl blog. That'll be up and available as quick as always. It's usually by the next day. Obviously, I always like to caveat that with this being a Thursday. It's Friday tomorrow, and you never know where that goes. But as always, you'll be able to get this content, re-listen to the main points, see the slides, and obviously go through the whole process again of making sure there's any things that you did miss. Please, please, please do submit your questions as we go. At the bottom of the screen, there is a Q&A box. Please whack any questions in there as we go, because obviously as the guys start to go through the slides, there might be something that you think of and then forget about later on in the presentation. So get them in there. As always, I'll collate those questions all together. I'll reference who sent in the question. I'll ask the question. We'll get the answers that you guys need. And ultimately, if we get overdosed in questions, we'll make sure that any that don't get answered on the session are answered for you on the write-up, or we'll get them back to you guys ongoing, as you can imagine. So also, we love the feedback. So please do take the time to actually give us the feedback at the end of this session. There'll be little things that says, hey, what did you think? Tell us where we can improve. Tell us where you didn't think went right. Suggest some speakers. We really do want that feedback from you guys. So please take that time to give us that 15 seconds to understand how things went today. And really, this is such an interesting subject. It's a topic that you have so many things to think about. And obviously the guys are going to cover an amazing amount of things within the next sort of 30 minutes around this, but it can really actually show you where you can add value to what we do as SEOs. I mean, I am very much looking forward to this. I'm going to sit back and I'm going to listen in as well. I might come up with some questions too and ask some as we go through this one. So it's no pressure on the guys, but obviously I've seen the content. So I absolutely know there's some great tips, tricks, and things for you guys to think about. So obviously sit back, strap in. Get ready for the Jess and Ruth to go for the next 30 minutes. But as I mentioned, get those questions ready and please submit them as we go, because I'm sure this subject's going to roll up a lot of stuff around this particular area. So enough from me. I'm going to hand over to Jess and Ruth. And I believe that Ruth is up first. So without further ado, over to Ruth Everett, Technical SEO Analyst at Deep Crawl. The floor is yours, Ruth.
Perfect. Thank you. Cool. So yeah, today Jess and I are here to talk about web accessibility and why as SEOs we should care about this. So the goal is simple. It's to make the internet accessible for everyone. So what I'm going to cover is what accessibility is, the 4 principles of accessibility, and then touch on the intersection between the work we do as SEOs and accessibility. And then Jess and I are going to discuss why accessibility is important before Jess shows us how we can test our own site's accessibility. So what is web accessibility? Essentially, it's the act of making sure websites are accessible and usable for everyone. So this means that users are able to perceive, understand, navigate, and interact with our websites. and it includes auditory, cognitive, physical, neurological, and visual usability. But it also benefits users who may have a temporary impairment. So this could be a user with a broken arm or someone that's recovering from surgery, as well as situational impairments. So that could be someone on a moving train or someone with a limited internet connection, as well as environmental impairments. So being in a brightly lit room or being in an area where you can't play audio aloud. So in order to be accessible, a website must meet 4 key principles. And this is known as PAW, which stands for perceivable, operable, understandable, and robust. So being perceivable, that encompasses removing any barriers that a user may have with accessing your content. So this includes making sure that websites are accessible for screen readers, supplying text alternatives, and having a logical structure. So here's an example. Having a clear and descriptive alt text. So rather than just having an empty alt text or alt text that's just like the name of the saved file, actually describing what the image contains. Next up is operable. So this focuses mainly on the interface and the navigation. So being operable means that a user can use the site despite the device that they are on. So an example of this could be giving users enough time to read content. So not having any moving or blinking content, avoiding alerts or pop-ups that you can't minimize, and preventing having like a time alert to complete a task. And then being understandable, so that means users are able to understand the information that's being displayed. So we have a clearly structured navigation and interface so that users can predict where they need to go once they're on the site. So this can be done by ensuring content is easy to read and follows a logical structure. So we're breaking content up with headings and we're using bullets and lists that are correctly marked up. And then finally, to be robust, this means that the website must be able to be accessed and interpreted by all the different technologies. So that includes screen readers, if someone's using a keyboard or a magnifying technology, and making sure that there's no errors in the code. So when websites are updated, they're always easy to understand and follow. And you're also using the correctly marked up components. So you're providing that additional information to assistive technologies. So while the work we do as SEOs typically focuses on ensuring websites are accessible for search engines, a lot of the areas that we focus on actually also impact accessibility for users. And a 2020 study by WebAIM actually found that 98% of homepages had detectable accessibility failures. And 97% of deeper content pages also failed the accessibility testing. So that's basically the whole web. And the most common failures were low contrast, missing alt text, and empty links. And obviously, as SEOs, we have control over 2 of those things. We deal a lot with alt text and with internal linking, making sure that the links are accessible. So with that in mind, let's explore some ways that SEO intersects with accessibility. So the first one is page titles. So not only do these allow users to identify whether the information on a page is going to be relevant to them, but they're also used to differentiate if you have a ton of tabs open. A screen reader is going to be able to tab through those and navigate between the pages, tell the user what the page contains. And so by optimizing page titles with users in mind rather than keyword stuffing for bots, we know that's a bad SEO practice, and making sure that they're accessible for users. So they go hand in hand there. The next one is headings. So just like a search engine crawler, if you're using assistive technology, that's going to basically navigate through a page using the headings. So similar to SEO best practice, when using heading tags and making sure it's accessible, make sure you only have one H1. The headings are relevant to the content that's beneath them. And if you have a heading, that there is content beneath it, it's not just sat there by itself. And then anchor text, obviously we know anchor text is useful for describing content for the page it's being linked to, and search engines are going to use that to understand the context of the destination page. But it's also going to help users determine if they want to click on a link. So typically, again, screen readers will tab through a page. It will inform users when a link's been found, and it will read out that anchor text, and then they can determine if they want to visit that page. And then maybe the most famous intersection is alt text. So obviously we know this provides textual alternative for users with visual impairments. So marking up the images that we have on our sites. And alt text will then be read aloud by screen readers. So again, we want to ensure that they're not just stuffed with keywords in an attempt to optimize for bots, because that's not going to make any sense to a user if the alt text is being read out to them. And then there's navigation. So generally navigation links are built to be tabbable. So if you're using a keyboard or if you're using a screen reader, you can read through and tab through. So just like with SEO best practice, ensuring your navigation is accessible means that you're only including like the key primary pages rather than the entire site and making a user tab through loads of different pages before they find what they're looking for. And then making sure content on a site is readable and digestible is important for both users and search engines. So having a simplified reading level is one of the best ways you can help users that may have a cognitive disability, but it's also going to help users who maybe the first language is not the one that's being used on the website, or if they're maybe reading while distracted. So you want to simplify the readability, make sure there's no jargon or difficult language, and that you're utilizing lists and things on the page. And then the final one, user interaction. So just like Googlebot is unable to perform any physical interactions like clicking buttons or opening accordions, screen readers also can't do this unless they're directed to by a user. So it's recommended to cut down on the number of physical interactions that are needed. And also it's best practice to kind of avoid those hover states to reveal content, because a user is not going to be able to see that if they're using a screen reader. So make sure if you are using things like hidden content that they're included within the source code. That's obviously best practice for SEO and for accessibility. And just a few other points that don't directly relate to SEO, but do relate to a user experience. So for motor requirements, don't require a mouse to be used. Sometimes users will be using a keyboard to tab through. If you've got link targets, make sure they're large enough if a user needs to magnify or is using a touch screen that they can click them. Make sure your links have focus states so that you know they're links, and use the default tabbing order that comes with how websites are set up. And for auditory requirements, if you've got videos on the site, make sure you're providing captions for those videos. If you've got audio, make sure you have transcripts available. For any media that you have on the site, add functional controls, and make sure that you don't autoplay videos when someone lands on a site, because no one enjoys that. So now we're just going to quickly talk about why we care about accessibility and why we think you also should care. So I think for me, the main one is user experience. So making sure, and this is going to help every user, regardless of the situation they're in, making sure that they can find what they're looking for, perform the action, like easily navigate the site. That's, I think, the most important. And the web is built for everyone, so it should be accessible for everyone, regardless. And we know that Google are shifting their focus towards user experience with all the updates, obviously the page experience updates. So they're going to be rewarding sites that provide the best experience. And we know that those accessible sites are providing the best user experience.
Yeah, for sure. And I also think, particularly at the moment, like as the world is moving more and more online, people who rely on sort of physical shops and physical services in real places are being pushed online. So we need to make sure that online is as inclusive as possible, so they have that choice whether to sort of stay at home if people are shielding or whatever, or to go out. We want to make sure we're kind of including everything.
Exactly.
Yeah, for sure. I think business impact is also really critical. For me, it's not my primary sort of driver for making sites accessible. I think inclusivity should be kind of enough of a reason to do it. But actually, what we find is that just making sites more accessible, it has such a huge impact on conversion rate and usability that it does have a massive impact on the business. I was telling Ruth earlier, we ran a test on a site that had kind of a low color contrast issue on their product pages in the review section, and just improving color contrast in the review section alone made their conversion rate increase overnight by 8%, which was incredible, just by making that more accessible.
And that's adding to, I guess, brand loyalty, right? So users know, and they'll come back to the site because they know that it's a good experience and that it's accessible for them.
Yeah, exactly. I think if you know a site is a pain to use, you will actively avoid it.
Exactly.
So in terms of just like building brand favor and building that kind of brand loyalty, it's a really easy, quick way of making sure all of your users are catered for.
Exactly. And if nothing else, it's also, in most cases, a legal requirement, right? We know that there's laws out there that mean websites need to be accessible, and there's been some famous like lawsuits in the past. So like Domino's got sued because they weren't accessible for screen readers, so people couldn't order pizzas if they were using screen readers. And even Beyonce got sued because people couldn't buy tour tickets if they were using a screen reader. So if nothing else, if none of the other things really matter to you, it's also a legal requirement in most cases.
Yeah, and it's particularly worth noting that as of September last year, it's now any public sector site in the UK is now legally obliged to be, I believe, AAA WCAG compliant. It might be AA, I'll have to double check on that. But so if you're operating in the public sector and you're not already passing all these tests, you need to be, because you're legally obliged to.
Exactly.
Exactly. Okay, I will jump in and share my screen, and I will take us through some quick tests that you can do on your site and some quick ways that you can improve your accessibility. There we go. Super. So how can we make our sites more accessible? This is not an exhaustive list by any means. I could probably do 100 webinars about making your site more accessible, but these are some of the most common things that we encounter on websites, most common issues, and the ones that tend to impact the widest range of people. So today I'm going to talk about testing and improving your color contrast, making your images more accessible, making your forms more accessible. I'm going to touch upon accessible navigation. I did see a Q&A pop up about mega menus, so I'll touch upon mega menus as well. And then I'll just finish off with some other quick wins that you can implement, go away and implement or test on your sites. So the first thing is improving color contrast. So I think this is probably one of the most impactful things you can do for accessibility. It doesn't just impact people with sort of low color perception or a visual impairment. It impacts everyone. So what I'm going to talk about is what I call the paper test, which is a quick test just to see how well contrasting your site is. I'm going to talk about the Wave Chrome extension and how you can use that to detect and improve color contrast, and also the WCAG color contrast checker, which is a WebAIM tool. So the paper test is probably worth noting before I jump into this. This test is actually probably inaccessible to anyone who does have low vision, because what you basically do is take a piece of printer paper and plonk it on your screen. If you can still read your website and understand it relatively well with that piece of paper on the screen, the chances are your color contrast is sufficient. Obviously, if you already have low vision, firstly, you probably know if you have a color contrast issue on your site, but also with a piece of paper over, that's probably not going to be a representative test. So just a super quick test to see if you have an issue there that might need further investigation. The next thing I would do is I use the Wave Chrome extension. This is a really awesome tool for just sort of quickly getting an idea of what's compliant on a site and what's not. What you can do is jump into the details tab. This is a free Chrome extension, and just toggle what appears on the screen, and you'll see any issues are marked up with little icons. So you can see these little red icons popping up across the screen. So what you can see here is up the top here, we've got these nav labels have some sort of color contrast issues, and we'll also see a bit further down that there are some too. Cool. So I'm just going to take, at the top, there was some nav labels. If you missed them from the GIF, that's because the color contrast is so poor. I nearly missed them too. You can just right click and use Chrome DevTools to find a hex reference if you don't already know it. And you can also, from the styles tab, find the size of the text in question, which in this case is about 14 pixels, which is roughly 10.5 point. Then what we can do with this information is we can jump over to the WCAG color contrast checker on WebAIM. If you just Google color contrast checker, it should come up. Or there's a link at the end of the deck as well. So you can pop in your foreground color and your background color, and then you can sort of see whether you pass or fail. So we know that the text in question in this particular example was about 10.5 points. So that would be considered normal text for the purposes of this test. This is all detailed on the color contrast checker page as well. Anything above 14 point and bold or 18 point is considered large. So we can see that they fail pretty hard on color contrast. So how do we go about fixing this? They have these really nice little sliders that you can just use to drag and to find a color contrast that would work and would be compliant. Or in the case of made.com, they could just make these nav labels bigger. 10.5 point is pretty dinky for main nav. So I would say make it larger as the first port of call. The next thing I want to touch on a little bit is some ways that you can make your images more accessible. So I'm going to talk about embedding text in images and why you shouldn't do that. How to craft useful alt text that isn't just optimized for bots, as Ruth was saying. It should be optimized for users who are going to be kind of interacting with this alt text primarily. A quick note on automating alt text, and also I want to talk about use of color coding and some alternatives that you can use to make it more accessible. Please don't embed your text in images. It's not good for screen readers and it's not good for search engines. HTML text overlaid, particularly on things like banners, is much, much better. So I'm going to give you a couple of quick tests that you can do if you're not entirely sure whether you're embedding text in images or not. So this is an example from ASOS. You can see I can highlight the text on this banner, which means it's HTML text. That means that a screen reader will be able to dictate that to a non-sighted user. It also means that search engines can understand that text and they can perceive the H1 as well. Some sites have highlighting disabled, that's fine. You can also just right click and open it in a new window. And you can see in this case, there's no text overlaid there. So we can verify that that's HTML, that is accessible and fine. In terms of writing alt text, there's a few considerations that I'd kind of like to bring to your attention. The first one is decorative images don't need alt text. So if you have a really highly visual site, but most of the images don't serve any real function or sort of try to convey any information, I would probably advise against adding alt text. Reason being, if someone is on a screen reader and they have to listen through all of your image descriptions, that's going to get quite annoying quite quickly. But if an image has any kind of function or information, then I would suggest you do add alt text. So as an example from Gymshark here, we have the logos and some of those icons. Those are functional images. To a non-sighted user, it might be hard to work out what those links do. So we would want to add alt text so a screen reader can announce them and describe them properly. This banner image, on the other hand, is decorative. So it doesn't serve any real functional purpose, it just looks nice. I would probably advise against adding alt text to this kind of image. Maybe not if you've got sort of one banner on a page, but if you've got lots and lots and lots of them, I would probably steer clear. Now, it's hard to tell from this screenshot, but this text in the middle that says must-haves is actually a second image overlaid on top of the first. So it's effectively a picture of text. It has information, it is words, it is trying to convey meaning, but because it's an image, a screen reader or a search engine couldn't perceive this. So I just want you to consider how this Shop Now button would appear to a user that was using a screen reader or who couldn't read that must-haves image. It just says Shop Now. There's no alt text to describe the image. Maybe someone's just clicked on the women's wear category from the homepage and they're instantly being presented with a button that just says Shop Now. I thought I was already shopping. Shop what? So again, this kind of ties into descriptive link text. Actually, shop must-haves might be a better use of link text than shop now. So yeah, just consider how these functional and informational images appear without any visual context, and also consider how your text works without the images, and see if you can sort of match up and tie up that user journey for people who can't see them. Here's another example. I've stolen this from the Airbnb website. So this is on a page that is kind of explaining how you can design a great experience. You can sell experiences on Airbnb now, workshops and things like that. On the right-hand side, you can see there's a paragraph with some great information. And then on the left-hand side, we've got a picture of a nice little vignette that someone might do a cooking workshop from, with a couple of captions that read, "What's my introduction?" and "Make a simple shopping list." Now, you can see from my little wave pop over here is that they have null or empty alternative text on this image, which means there's no description whatsoever, which is a real shame because there's some great little tidbits contained within the image. So a helpful alt text in this situation could be something like, "Experience location example with captions, 'What's my introduction?' and make a simple shopping list." Unhelpful alt text would say, "Cooking station." I'm not going to delve into this in too much detail, but I did want to just quickly shout out Hamlet Batista wrote an absolutely awesome article about how you can automate alt text using Python kind of in bulk. I have linked to it in the resources section at the end, but particularly for things like e-com sites where there are a lot of images, this can be a really great solution. For color coding, quite often sites, particularly when you've got sort of it's really information heavy sites, people use color coding to convey information. Where possible, we would try and steer you away from just using color coding and using a secondary alternative for people who either have low vision or maybe are just colorblind and struggle with sort of slight differences in color. So yeah, I'm looking at you, BBC News. This is just a flat image. There was no interactivity. There was no secondary data source. I know for a fact my husband is colorblind and he couldn't understand half of this, which is a real shame because it's really important information. That's not to say don't color code, but what I would suggest is maybe try and include a secondary way of allowing people to access this information. So cross-hatching, patterns, dashed lines in line graphs and things like that are all good ways of adding a second point of differentiation. Or you can even include just a data table. So if the BBC had just linked to a data table that listed all of the counties in the UK and their current coronavirus status, that would have been another good way of making it accessible. So on to making your forms a little bit more accessible. This could be anything from a checkout or a contact form or anything like that. I'm going to touch quickly on ways you can lay out your forms, also how you can write useful instructions and tooltips. I'm going to quickly delve into ARIA roles and states and the role they can play in accessible forms, and also just touch upon timing again. So a few tips for laying out your forms. Try to keep them to a single column. It's more mobile friendly, but also it's more logical. It tends to be more accessible to people with certain cognitive impairments, things like that. Avoid unnecessary use of intricate UI elements, things like sliders, rollers, tickers, anything that isn't sort of immediately obvious can just introduce unnecessary stress and complexity to something that otherwise doesn't need to be that complex. Ruth did mention this, but make sure clickable elements are plenty big enough. 44 by 44 pixels is kind of the WCAG criteria for large enough, and also with plenty of an active space surrounding them. So if someone maybe is on a touch screen and perhaps they have a slight tremor, or like they're on a moving train, we don't want there to be a sudden movement that means that they accidentally press a button that's directly next to the one they wanted to. We don't want people accidentally buying 10 of something or buying something instead of removing it from their cart. The other thing that I would urge you to do is to include visible form labels. So this means when you have a text field, don't just use placeholder text to indicate what should be in that form field. Have an HTML text label directly above it, and also make sure it's properly associated in your code. So the Wave accessibility plugin, Chrome extension, will indicate if it looks like something should be a form with a label and it's incorrectly labeled. Or I have linked to an article I wrote in the resources slide that gives some code examples that you can use to find out whether your forms are properly labeled. So I've just taken this example from the Wayfair checkout. It's on the whole pretty good. I would say the fact that it's single column is great. Labels are visible, although a little bit small, I would say, but they are correctly associated in the code. A couple of things I would probably want to improve on this checkout is there's no tooltips or instructions whatsoever. And while for me, I could work out what's going on this form, if someone's not super tech savvy or maybe has a cognitive impairment, it may not be quite as obvious to them. So include a tooltip if you can. Also, there's no indication of which of these fields are required, which just sort of introduces another unnecessary level of complexity and uncertainty that we could easily solve with a little asterisk. When creating tooltips, this is just a very quick note, but try to include tooltips wherever an instruction or a field could be a bit ambiguous. So that could be something like, if you've got a date field and it needs to be entered in a certain format, include a tooltip. The one that we see probably most commonly used is the 3 numbers on the back of your card. There's always a tooltip that points you in the right direction. And again, even if you think it's obvious, other people might not. So consider as if your nan was using this website, or someone that's not super tech savvy, could they understand it? Another point on tooltips is to try and make sure that they stay open when clicked. So the problem with hover-only tooltips is that they can't be read with a magnifying software. So how magnifying softwares work is basically you mouse over the part that you want to read and it blows it up for you, it zooms in. The trouble is, if you don't have your tooltips staying open, here's an example, when you click them, a user can't then mouse over the tooltip to magnify it, which means they can't read that information if they're using a magnifying software. What we tend to see is that most tooltips are clickable on mobile and tablet because they're touch screens, but for some reason on desktop they tend to be hover only. If you have the choice, make them clickable. Not like Lush. Another thing you can do, particularly if you have forms with slightly less standardized UI elements, so things like sliders, is you can use ARIA roles and states. So basically what this is a set of markup that describes to screen readers in a kind of a standardized format what the actual purpose or the function of that element is. So in the case of a slider, you could announce it as like, this slider, I don't know, selects price range or distance or something like that. And also states. So states allows screen readers to announce to a user whether this checkbox has been checked or unchecked. It's also really useful for announcing changes that otherwise we would rely on a visual cue to understand. So for example, if you're shopping and you remove an item from a cart, someone with good vision has a visual cue of that item disappearing from their cart, and then they know it's been removed. If you're on a screen reader and you can't see the screen well or at all, you won't be able to see that item being removed from the cart. So you can use ARIA states to announce to the user, this item was removed from the cart. And finally, just another point on timing, just to reiterate what Ruth was saying, avoid the use of timers, countdowns, that kind of thing on checkouts or forms. At best, they can be unnecessarily stressful for people that may find it takes a little bit longer to complete forms, or they might find that forms are difficult anyway. Adding that constant pressure of time doesn't help. And at the absolute worst case scenario, if they don't manage to do it within the time limit, it is completely inaccessible for them. So if you're trying to book tickets or something like that, and you cannot complete the form within the time allowed, you simply can't go, which is obviously not okay. Accessible navigation. Mostly navigation tends to be quite well handled by different types of assisted technology, but there are some really easy things that we can do to improve it further. So as Ruth mentioned, tab order is really important. So for users that don't use a mouse to navigate your page, they will primarily often use the tab key and their keyboard to navigate. Tab order is determined by your DOM order. So the order in which something appears in the code is the order in which it will become keyboard focusable. A logical tab order is top to bottom, left to right, like most people would read a web page. But when things start getting injected, maybe by JavaScript and things like that, or pages are built dynamically, you may find that your tab order isn't automatically logical. So I've got a little quick example here. This is from the Erudite site. When the GIF runs back to the start, you'll see it's a logical order. It goes top to bottom, left to right. See, I can tab through the nav, jump down. Everything kind of works in a logical order. So like I said, this is determined by the order elements appear in the DOM. If this isn't logical, you can use the tab index attribute to specify a better order. So basically you can add or subtract a 1 from the normal order of something to make it appear sooner or later in your focus order. The next thing I wanted to touch on is the use of skip links. So these allow users on a keyboard to skip straight to the main content of a page without having to tab through the whole navigation first. Particularly important if you've got a huge nav or a mega menu, because otherwise every time a user wants to get to the readable content of your page, they're going to have to tab through your navigation first. Usually this is automatically generated by a browser if you have the correct semantic markup, and that means the main content of your page should be contained within main tags. It looks a bit like this. On the Erudite site, you can style them if you don't want the automatic browser one, but basically when you hit tab for the first time on landing on a page, it should open this skip link, which should then, on pressing enter, jump you down to the start of the content. Here is an example of a site that does it very poorly, sadly a public sector one. I can't skip to the main content. In fact, I can't access any of the content in that top banner at all. And to get to the main content, it took me 11 tabs. If you want to book train tickets or you want to read a lot of information, that is a lot of tabbing. You can also help your navigation be more accessible by using properly descriptive link text. So remember that not all of your users will be able to skim read the context of your links or be able to see where they live on a page in the same way that visual users would. Here's an example of descriptive link text from the NHS website on the left. Great, go to the health A to Z, very descriptive. Go to medicines A to Z, very descriptive. Network Rail's 20 strong station network from spring 2020, that's not descriptive. A descriptive link would be read a list of stations with Wi-Fi. And finally, active states. So just make sure when you are making sure everything is keyboard focusable, you also have a visual focus indicator and that they have sufficient color contrast. So you can see here, as I'm tabbing through the Erudite site, these little pink boxes appear. A few other quick wins. I think I'm mainly just reiterating what Ruth was saying, but do try to speak in plain English or whatever language you're speaking in. Avoid use of metaphor, you know, abstract terms, that kind of thing. Make it as plain speaking as possible. Try to provide information in multiple formats, like Ruth was saying. Transcription and closed captions are great. If you have sort of graphs and charts, also have a table. Make sure your page, your site can be browser zoomed without breaking, and use proper heading structure.
So just a couple of key takeaways. Accessibility is not extra work and effort. It's just having a bit more understanding and empathy. and accessibility and SEO complement each other in the best way. And we hope we've been able to show you some examples of that today.
Just a few of the resources. I will share these on Twitter later, and I know Deep Crawl team are going to share these slides, but some of the things I find really useful or have mentioned today. And question time.
Brilliant. Thanks, guys. Really comprehensive. Very, you know, got me certainly thinking about a few things from all of that sort of stuff. And we've got loads of questions as well, which is wonderful. So really appreciate you guys taking the time to put all these slides together. And actually, you've really covered a breadth of things. And, you know, we've got a load of questions around examples and stuff like that as well. So I know sometimes, Jess, you covered some of the things that have been asked from an example point of view. So I'm just going to shout out to, there's 3 or 4 questions around, can you give us some examples of that? I was going to suggest that we do the same thing as to share some examples on social. So what we'll do with those questions, guys, is actually rather than trying to get into live examples on here, in the interest of time, we'll share some examples of those exact things to you guys on Twitter afterwards and steer you in the right direction. But as always, I like to start with the first question that we got. And Jess, you actually mentioned it as well in the middle of the start of your presentation. So are mega menu drop downs not accessible? You know, how do you ensure that mega menu drop downs are accessible? You know, can they be accessible? And if they can, how would you guys go about it? Who fancies that one?
Oh, I'll start with that one. Ruth, you might have some stuff to add. So on the whole, so long as all of the links in your mega menu are available in the HTML, it should be fairly accessible. Where you have kind of mega navs built, Ajax navs or really JavaScript heavy ones, they might not be so much. Some screen readers, particularly I think JAWS, doesn't tend to play nicely with really JavaScript heavy sites. So long as you know that your links are available in the HTML, they're normal hrefs, they should be accessible. In terms of being able to navigate with a keyboard, the best thing to do is just test it. I would say, so long as there's a skip link, and so long as you have kind of good visual focus indicators for keyboard navigators, that also should be fine. But also within reason, of course, like Ruth was saying, you don't want to sort of present hundreds and hundreds of page options to your users, because that's going to be very hard for someone with a screen reader, or just laborious for someone with a screen reader to listen to all of those examples. If you do want to test things with a screen reader, I should have mentioned actually, I tend to use Chromevox, VOX. It's a Chrome extension, which is really just enlightening. If you've never tried to use a screen reader to navigate your site before, I would definitely recommend.
Fantastic. Yeah, I mean, I would just reiterate that. And also, when you have that mega menu like drop down, make sure that it kind of stays open, because even like it's annoying if you hover over it and then you go back and it disappears and you have to go back and hover over it. Make sure that it kind of stays there, it doesn't disappear if you move slightly off the menu.
That is a great point. And making sure it's, of course, you know, targets are big enough for anyone to tap.
Exactly.
Yeah, there's a really good point actually, because I think it annoys us enough, the fact that when you scroll off a menu and a large menu like that, and then obviously you're constantly in that sort of toil of going backwards and forwards. So you know, actually bringing in the fact of keyboard navigation rather than mouse navigation starts to make it really interesting as well. So hopefully that answers that question. A great question here from Stephen as well, which is, you know, picking up the contrast piece. He's kind of, as he said, he's prefixed it with, obviously, you know, a lot of accessibility issues are fairly standard and easy for brands to agree and implement. I think it's more the point that sometimes people forget to actually implement these things and go down the road. So I'm totally in agreement with Stephen there that, you know, things like alt text and link text and those various pieces, very standard, very easy, should be in play. But obviously from his point of view, how do you know, something like color contrast, it might be an uphill battle for a client and to more readily sort of accept that and implement it. So have you had any experience, you know, maybe Jess from the agency side of things on, you know, how do you make them prioritize that? How do you kind of go to them and say, hey, look, we need to think about, I guess it's that age-old conversation when you go in and speak to the head of brand marketing who goes, it has to be that color and it's my brand and it's this and it's that, you know, how do you kind of convince them to move away from that and see the light in some respects?
For sure, it's a great question, and it's something we see particularly in kind of older brands that really became established pre-internet. They most of their kind of brand colors tend to be designed for print, and it doesn't quite transfer or translate so well online. One of the things we like to do personally is I love to split test things. So run a test in Google Optimize if they're not sure, or another split testing software. Optimize is free, and you can literally show them side by side. Okay, well, you know, this is the actual impact it had on your users, and you can use things like Hotjar recordings to build that case. But also, particularly in the case of color contrast, I don't think we've ever had a case where improving color contrast had a negative impact on the bottom line of a site. So you will be able to see a direct kind of revenue uplift as a result of that. I think particularly for color contrast, that's how I'd go about it.
Right. Anything to add to that, Ruth, on that front?
No,
or?
I agree with that. Yeah, that is the best way to go.
Good. We're in agreement. This is great. I'm on board with that as well. Interesting question from Emily as well is just, you know, and it is, you know, it's when we think about things, it's how far can you go with something? You know, she asked the question, how far can you go with accessibility? Because obviously out there we have the A11Y movement, which is obviously all about accessibility and many things and project-driven community around that. You know, how far can we actually go with an accessibility analysis when we perform a technical audit? You know, is there a point where you can't go much further? Is there a point where you just go, it's as far as we can take it? Or do you think we can go the whole way without detriment to, you know, performance of the site or anything like that? It's finding that balance, I guess.
Yeah, I mean, there's examples of sites that have gone the full way and are performing great. And I think it just depends on how much resource you have and like getting people on board for that, and, you know, making sure you have the resource to do that. But you could go the whole way if you wanted to. And I think I've found this, I'm sure Jess is the same, but when you kind of start looking into it and then you find other things and then you kind of go down that rabbit hole of wanting to be able to do it all and make sure that you are as accessible as possible. So I think it really depends on how far you want to take it and how far you're able to take it for the site or the client you're working with.
Yeah, absolutely. I think I totally agree with that. I think probably another thing that maybe for me I find a limitation is finding people to test sites. I can kind of test from best practice and from what I know is good accessibility and good practice, but ultimately I'm never going to kind of interact with a website in the same way with someone who does use a screen reader or who does use keyboard navigation, or, you know, maybe it does have a cognitive impairment. I can't test it completely from their perspective. So I think also just accessible sort of access to people who genuinely have these requirements, who can test it, and real user testing is going to be really valuable, and probably something that most SEOs, you know, certainly can't offer from every perspective. You know, we might have familiarity with a couple, but not all.
No, absolutely. I know we're running a little bit of over time, guys, but I'm going to just ask a couple of more quick questions and then get you guys back to your evenings, because I think there's just so many great questions and everybody's staying on, which is wonderful. So I'm just going to fire through a couple more just in case you guys are wondering why we're still running. Great question, which was an anonymous, so I don't know who asked it, but you know, thank you for the question. It's just around, you know, what was your recommendation on action words and link text? You know, obviously like the word see or read or watch, etc. You know, for example, view accessibility guide versus just accessibility guides. You know, do they help or hinder accessibility? I guess it's a question around, you know, how much more descriptive should you be on those words? I mean, it's the age-old sort of SEO scenario of somebody writes the word on, you know, contact us, the alt text is contact us. How much more can you, how clever can you be with it? So I guess it's how, you know, any tips you would have on making a very meaningful action words on those links.
Oh, that is a great question, actually. I think for me, probably one of the biggest things or biggest considerations there is predictability. So if something is going to open in a new tab, make sure that's described, or if it's going to be a window, or if it's going to have sort of an adverse effect on what's going on the web page, make sure you're announcing that and kind of pre-warning users so it's not a surprise. In terms of actually using things like read or view, That's a good question, actually. I hadn't really considered it. Really, do you have any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I haven't really considered. I guess it is gonna. I don't think it's gonna hinder. I think if anything, it's gonna help, because it is describing what you need to do, what you would do if you clicked that link. You know, read this accessibility guide, kind of giving them the example of what they're gonna do when they click that link. So I couldn't see it hindering accessibility.
Yeah. Exactly, and I think words like read just help with that sort of element of predictability. You know what kind of content is about to come your way when you click that link.
Yeah, so, rather than it popping up like a video and you're not expecting it to be a video.
Exactly, or it's interactive and you didn't want
it. Fair enough. One quick final question then, because I know we're over time. Could you please explain, and let's try it maybe from both of you in a few words, what tabbing is? And there's been a lot of talk about tabbing, and somebody just asked the question, if you could just give us a clear definition of tabbing, would be great. Who wants to do it? And who can do it in less than 10 words?
I'll go for it if you like. Navigating with the tab key. So you can use tab to move forwards, tab shift moves back, enter or space is enter or space, basically go.
Clicking the link.
There we go. That's tabbing. Well, we are out of time, guys. I really appreciate it. We're about 6 minutes over now, but you guys all hung on there and nobody's dropped off, which is amazing. So thank you very much for all of your interactivity and those great questions. As mentioned, the ones around examples, we'll get those figured out. We'll get some examples for you and we'll tweet those out, or maybe we'll include those as part of the deep crawl write-out that will go out live on the blog. Somebody did ask where they can get a copy of the recording. Obviously, we follow up with you guys, but also that will be attached to the write-up as well. So you'll be able to listen back, take in all of the slides, get some answers, get some examples. We'll have it all there for you tomorrow. So, you know, really appreciate you guys jumping on. And obviously, I've got guys in the chat box now, Emily, Dave. Really appreciate, big thank yous to you guys for attending. And thank you for saying it was really good and really valuable. So big thanks to you guys for attending. Massive thank you to Ruth and Jessica for the great content, great examples to come, and everything about all accessibility. Please do feel free, if Jessica, you can just knock on one slide, that would be great, to reach out to us and get a demo set up, you know, get a view on you know, the different things that we can do for you as Deep Crawl. You know, we'll give you a free consultation or a free demo. Quite happy to do that. Remember to think about our ebooks. You know, we do these free ebooks, and grab one of those. I mean, obviously Core Web Vitals is a big thing that's going to be coming out this month. Google's bringing out the page update algorithm. I think it's really important that we do understand that more, because it's been talked about for quite a long time, but sort of middle of this month, we're going to start to see the rollout of that. As I mentioned, again, I won't mention it, you know, the full write-up will go live. But please do take the time to, you know, feedback to us as well. We'd love to get your feedback. We'd love to see your views on things we could do better, or, you know, if we're doing great, just let us know we're doing great, because obviously people are shouting it out. That's brilliant. Speakers, topics, things you'd like to hear from, that would be really, really much appreciated. Our next webinar is on the 14th of July, so please stick that one in your diary. We've talked about how accessibility absolutely impacts everything that we do, and how the web should be accessible to everybody out there. This is how SEO impacts your business. Straight, you know, return on investment, ROI, you know, do SEO or fail or die. That's how I see it in a lot of respects, not just because I work in the SEO industry. Big thank you again, just finally to Jess and to Ruth. Great to have you guys on board. And ultimately, guys, thank you to you for listening today, and look forward to seeing you on the webinar next month. Thank you.
Awesome.
Thank you.
Thanks. Bye.